Welcome back, everyone. So I have the great pleasure to introduce my colleague, Patrick Doan, who is a very interesting person. Well, you'll discover by yourself. He's going to introduce you to two research projects he's been conducting for years with his researchers team called Gestural Script. So these are really fascinating projects, and I'm not going to say more. Okay, enjoy.
Thank you, Sébastien. Can you hear me well? Yes. So, yes, I'm going to give you two presentations. One about a system, a typographic system to transcribe sign language, and another one which is more of a digital tool to preserve, record, and pass on writing skills. I will first introduce the first project by telling you about the research format. How did we lead in a practical way this research? It started with a student project which was in her bachelor and developed into a master project. The project still bears the same goal, which is representing sign language. I will go into the details about sign language later, but what you have to see is the progress of a subject which emerged from open task of graphic design, and eventually it became an interesting object of research through time and meetings. The opportunity to meet, for example, a linguist who saw into the problematic of the subject an interesting field of investigation. Meeting the right person is not enough. You need also the space and the time to carry and develop a research. In that matter, this project actually founded the notion of the postgraduate program, which was originally allowing an extra space and time after master to develop an interesting project. So this sign language project helped to establish the postgraduate program, although the postgraduate program later evolved into type design education and left in the back problematic of language and typography. Yet it was started, and we have the chance to have a director which is believing in the role and the strengths of research in the field of graphic design. Barbara identified this subject and gave us a day in the week to meet, because we need to meet to work. This type of work cannot be carried in an individual fashion. It requires several skills. It requires constant exchange and discussion. As you can see, the collaborators list is long. There is two linguists, one from Rouen, one from Poitiers, Dominique and Claudia. There is a developer, Jean-François Dauphin. There is designers, Morgane Rébulard and Adrien Comtesse. And there are also type engineers like Mathieu Reguet. So all those people, they need a space to meet. So this is the format. Every Friday we meet in Paris, and since 10 years we do that. So if you put it together, maybe it's 40 Fridays per year. For 10 years, it makes 400 days. And this is the path of the format of our format of carrying research. So now let's get down to it. Sign language. You all came across sign language by seeing people practicing it in the street. There is 135 sign language in the world. It means that there is no universal sign language. There is, let's say, nationalities. One example is to fight. In Europe, to fight is to shoot at each other. In Japan, to fight is with the sword. Guess what? There is cultural heritage. Another element that you can immediately see when you listen or just watch, because you don't listen sign language, watch sign language, is that it uses the environment. It uses a location, which is space, the body, and the environment. If I say hello to Barbara, I will point to her. But if I say hello to you, I will do that. So I'm actually taking into account the actual environment. So there is an element of analogy. Is this language what is unique? While vocal language are using convention. Of course, we have some onomatopoeia or analogic element, like click, clack, crick, crack, slash, swish, spare, spit. But it was lost progressively for a more conventional type of language. Sign language, on the contrary, still relies and keeps a unique and fascinating dimension is iconicity. For example, a tree looks like a tree. And autumn is a tree with the leaves that falls. Those dimensions makes sign language both a fascinating language, a lively and actual language recognized in education, as a language of France, but also makes it a very difficult language to represent. So let's go into the structure of sign language. Is using hands. The hand, for example, to say a giraffe. One linguistic approach is to say that the hand is using as a tool to shape forms in space. It can be, if I do that, I shape a form in space. It's raining. And if I do, it's raining very hard. And if I want to say a giraffe, I will make a pro shape, has a tube, and say it's a long neck, an animal with long neck. Or a hog, I will do that, it's a hog. So this approach see a terrible emphasis on the hand and its capacity to create shapes, whether shapes that embodies the shapes or shapes that trace or gives a direction. Okay, that's one parameter, the hand. Position, of course, as we say, there is a direction. Every gesture is pointing into a dimension, the 3-dimension. Movement, of course. One simple example is I like. I like, the movement is this. I go from I like. But if I don't like, it's the contrary. So it's basically the same gesture if you do it both ways, but it's opposite meanings. And mouse action. The face is a central element to convey forms and so on. And emotions, of course. I can say, I like. Oh, I like, yeah, I really like. So all this together performs a deep and rich and nuanced language, which can evoke conceptual dimension, emotional, psychological, and of course, material situation. It is a real language. But now, representing all those dimensions together is a much more difficult task than representing vocal language. Vocal language has a very definite and limited set of sounds. We see it in the International Phonetic Alphabet. And vocal dimensions are linear. You cannot say two sounds at the same time. There's always one sound after another, and so on. While sign language, you can have multiple dimensions interacting at the same time. So, it resists representation. That's what I want to say. Oops, I'm going backwards. So, well, just to push away one preconception that might pop to your mind, just why don't we use alphabet to represent sign language? Good idea. But remember, alphabet refers to medium which is sound, which is a modality which is vocoacoustic, produced by the mouth to inputted by the ear. So guess deaf people are missing this loop, this vocoacoustic loop. So if you give them an alphabet to write concept like a car and so on, those are clear as Chinese for them or has mathematical formula because it refers to nothing. And worse than ever, it never loops in their cognitive process. So it's a bad idea. We need a representation system that loops with their own world of signification and production. So there's two main approaches to the representation of sign language. The first one is a logographic approach, which is a very visually driven approach, and is aimed at one specific goal, is comprehension. This is sign writing. It's a system developed by Valérie Sutton, and it allows to communicate and learn sign language. It is one of the most popular writing systems among deaf people. But one thing is missing. While it is very good at comprehension and visualizing a position or a sign, it is not researchable. All elements are interlocked in each other. On the other hand, there is another population that needs to represent sign language for another purpose. Those are the linguists. They need a phonological approach. A phonological approach is the decomposition of the language into its minimal components of let's say, production. For our language, it's phonetic, is the sound. For the sign language, it is the unit, which is the parameters. Here we have the system Hamnosis, which is decomposing sign language into hands, fingers, position, orientation, movement. It is very good at doing that. But as you can see, it is not very readable. It's not very understandable to the perspective of human reading. It is like a mathematic formula. But for linguists, it's great for doing research and analysis on big database and corpus. This is what our project of Typannot is driven by this second approach, the analytical and phonological approach. We are not trying to tackle the question of writing. It is a much more complex issue, and we focused on phonological approach. So what are linguists actually doing when they analyze sign language? They use corpus that they record, and they need to describe it. They need to annotate it. It uses a program like Elan, where they can have different tracks where they will put annotation of the hands, the face, what is he doing, the movement, and so on and so on. The current limitation. The linguists using the existing transcription system, like Hamnosis, have different limitations. There is a low level of representation and decomposition at the moment. For example, the hand is taken as a fixed compound. You have a limited amount of identified hand posture. There are about 150 identified hand posture. So what you don't see is that how the fingers behave or the thumb behave, but you see a whole image of the hand. So there is what we call a low level of representation. And it limits the searchability in language components. For example, the fingers and the interaction between the fingers or the movement of the fingers. Another limitation is the representation is mainly based on what is visible. And that is a big problem, is that gesture, when you see it, is what I called a surface effect. The image is the result of internal transformation of articulation of the body. And for a linguist, dealing with only image and representation is just half of the data. You're just dealing with the surface result, the surface effect. The third limitation is transcription is mainly focusing on handshape. As you can see, handshape will draw like the forms of the handshape in space, and the handshape's trajectory. There is this biased view on the description of body gesture just by focusing on the position of hand. While we know that the orientation of the hand actually depends on the different transformation of the arms, the forearms, and the wrist. So there is a lack of actually explicit description of the gesture components of orientation and position of the hands, because we just say, oh, it's somewhere there, and it's somewhere orienting here. But it doesn't say anything about how does it transform and can transform and makes meaning through the transformation. And one of the final problems is that the current phonological approach are unable to combine both analytic and readability. It can only be displayed in a long form of equation, and it limits the communication capacity between researchers. Because if you talk with, I want to tell you about this sign, but I have to show you a sequence like this of information, it's not very effective. So Typannot is a system for transcribing sign language at the deep phonological level. For who? Well, we just said it, researchers in sign language, but not only, as you will see. Why? Because it will need to address the limitations of current systems that I just talked about. And why it is important to address those limitations? Because it promotes new type of analysis. By having access to this new level of description, new type of research can be taken. And how? Well, by associating linguistic, typographic, and programming expertise. So the process, I try to make, to break it down like a wheel, an ongoing looping wheel, but sometimes it doesn't make a wheel, but there are diagonals. It goes all the direction at the same time. But first we need groundwork done by the linguists who do a linguistic structuration of parameters. Then annotators will test the graphematic formula, to see that it is able to represent the dimension of language, of movement. Third, we design characters, and that is, we are talking about letters, characters, which has a meaning. A finger has a meaning. An arm, an angle, an interaction has a meaning. So they are significant, minimal element of meaning. It's falling apart. Then we go developing a consistent syntax and designing glyphs addressing high level of representation. Those higher level of representation I will explain later, when all these micro elements of letters can combine and come back to a logographic dimension of representation. And we develop input interface and implement the font. And we have people like Mathieu Reguet who is helping us doing this background work, this engineering work. We have an information structure which has to be very consistent, not to get lost from one parameter to the other. First, we say which parameter it is, and for each parameter, we have to define the parts involved in the parameter. For example, for the hand, you get the fingers and the thumb. For the arm, you have the arm, forearm, wrist. For the face, you have the tongue, the lips, and so on. So those are the parts. For every part, there are some variables. Variables of the fingers are the form. It can be this form, it can be this form, it can be this form, and its angle. For the arm, there are all the rotation. So every part has its own type of variables. And values, of course. Once you have the variables, you have the different values, which are the degrees. First degree, second degree, and so on. First degree, and so on. So you have an information structure. These create the bricks of information. Those are the deep level of description that we are talking about, and which are researchable within the data. And using this description ensures, and the syntax ensures that it's consistent, exchangeable, researchable. So these are, just the bricks of information, like you might find an A and a B and a C. For the hand, we have a syntax which starts with the side of the hand, the first finger, second finger, third finger, fourth finger, the thumb, and the interaction between the five. This sequence is the sequence that represents that hand shape. It's generated through a software, and it has an interesting element. that we wanted to insist upon was that it could have two levels of display. One which is decomposed and one which is synthetic, more a logographic approach that allows seamless swap between the two and two kind of consultation visually. Logographical for communication and phonological for analysis. How do we go from one to the other? Well, that's thanks to the magic of OpenType. Here we go. We can recognize sequence. We can recognize phonological sequence and display whether synthetic forms or go back to an analytic form. And in both forms, they are researchable. And that is the main important thing for linguists. Okay, another element is this synthetic form is the concatenation. It is adding all the bricks of information and recompose a form which is analogic. How do we do that? With all those combinations and variables, we are closing almost 1 million combinations possible. And no designer can do that. It's impossible. It will take us a lifetime. So here comes Mathieu Reguet with typographic engineering knowledge, who can automatize and actually generate dynamically this million of combination, allowing this concept of fluently going from one to the other, making it a reality. Because it's nice as a designer to imagine that. It's different to make it work. Every shape has been tested with a sign language student to evaluate the choice, the graphical choice. What we think as a designer doesn't make sense as long as it is not adopted by users. So here we made a test at the University of Rouen. Sorry. Okay, secondly, when you have such a factory of information and variables and values and so on, you need an interface. So a keyboard won't help us. We need to create our own virtual keyboard. So by doing and condensing all the different parameters and allowing visual feedback, we allow people to intuitively understand the different variable and dimension. It's like in Photoshop. When you didn't know what contrast is, you just move the cursor and you say, oh, contrast, that's that. And, oh, and what is about gradient? Oh, gradient does that. So it's while interacting with the interface that you intuitively, in an implicit way, learn using the tool. So yeah, here what you see is, yeah, the result. This is an interesting element, that this feedback, this visual feedback. Whatever you do create something, modify something so that you can understand the meaning of your action. Okay. Well, we have different type of input system. Another input system is using a capture device. We have embracing modern technology that is nowadays able to recognize hand movement. Here we're using the leap to control the typeface. So helping annotators to go faster. It's not done yet. It's very complex because precision is the devil. Is really a headache. And while you have linguists who fantasize actually rigging yourself within a suit and performing and annotating, the reality is years further. But it is worth investigating the possibilities. Okay, well, I made you a whole speech about the biais of the Handshape. So I've been only talking about Handshape. What about the upper limbs representation? Here we go. We have upper limbs are made out of 3 parts. It is one of the parameters which has been resisted any representation system. Every represent system avoid representing the upper limb because of the complexity of the combination, and one complexity is representing it in 2 dimensions, because you have the 3-dimension perspective. And to understand at the typographic level a 3-dimensional structure like the body is really difficult. Not talking about all the different possible configuration. Well, what we try to do is to find possible graphic language and graphic structure that on the most economical and typographical level can show what? Show the position of the hands, show the position of the shoulder, of the elbow. And we have something here that is able, through the size of the dots, which shows every joint, in a very intuitive way, capture the silhouette of the body position. That took a long time to come to this economy, to visual economy. Maybe it's not perfect, but it gives an idea. We have the same develop a parametric input interface, showing the possibility to represent the body position, the upper limb position. So now we have the hand shape, we get orientation, which is, it's very important to understand the orientation of the hand that you see on the left, on the right. It dynamically produced through the concatenation of all the transformation of the joints. It is, again, not a surface effect. It is, a researcher can investigate how this orientation has been made, and so on and so on. Okay, well. Another interesting development of the project is the glyph repertoire. I was telling you about the hundreds of millions of possibility of combination, but reality is 65,000. OpenType can only carry 65,000 glyphs. There's no more space. So you have to make a choice. Well, actually, I need 291,600 glyphs. So I'm limited, and we had to adopt glyph repertoire composition, which is bottom-up. I will explain how. We make a basic repertoire of 37,500 signs, which cover the main big position. And in between, we don't produce. We let the user annotate them at a generic level, which is all these little bricks of information. There won't be a composed form yet, but every time he annotates something that we don't have, the software will send us a notice and say, he's using it in this language annotation, and you don't have it yet. So actually, the community of annotators are filling up the missing components, the missing compose. So instead of us deciding what is relevant or not to represent, we let the second half the job of the annotators. So it is a repertoire which is corpus-driven, not top-down, bottom-up. So to conclude further, we are almost finishing the release of the first version for Handshape. Upper limb configuration we follow in a year. We are aiming at registering the system characters in the Unicode, and more parameters will come. All kind of use aside from linguistic research. I will go back to that. Think about something. When you search a word in a dictionary, you are searching it by letters. It's called indexation, and it makes it very efficient. Currently, sign language doesn't have an indexation. It is using word book. So when you search for a word, you say, okay, it's a word which has to do with fruits. Let's go to the fruits dictionary. It has to do with transportation. Let's go to transportation. We are trying to develop this level of indexation and those tools to allow all kind of dictionary construction. That is one application. So yeah, That was it for this project.
This might be a silly question, but the usual process for admitting new characters in Unicode assumes evidence of those documents in use.
Yeah.
Do you anticipate any questions by the consortium about the formats that you're using or the encoding that you're using for the sign language?
Yeah, we are currently working, of course, in bac à sable, in the sandbox. For example, Hamnosis is registered, sign writing is registered. We can prove that we have users as well, and that we have a structure of system character. It will be a long process. There is non-existing position yet for our system. Although we might say that some might have a character for every fingers, but yeah, we have to investigate those issues. It will be a long process as well, but as we carry out in the most scientific way our work and demonstrate the necessity or the functionalities, we will try to have it registered. Yeah. Hamnosis already did some groundwork, of course, and it is important that, and we do recognize already this existing system. Yeah, sorry, it's very alien from the field of typography, Latin and historical, but...
It might be useful to look at some related activity for Unicode encoding of music notation, coming from composers of, let's say, contemporary music, where the traditional notation systems are deemed not enough.
Yeah.
And there have been some efforts in integrating better systems for music notation in Unicode, which might be a parallel.
And did they succeed?
It's in the process, yeah.
Okay, we joined force then.
Yeah.
Thank you. As I understand it now, it seems to be a writing system mostly intended for screen use and maybe print for the dictionary purpose. Is it the typographer's bias to do it in black and white? You could have used the color to also carry information.
It's true. It's true. It's absolutely true. There is a secret ambition that one day it will become a writing system. But we don't have, I'm not allowed to tell myself because it would be too big of a dream. But there is a secret ambition to keep it black and white for that purpose. Yes. But again, when you confront to reality and to the community, they might ask themselves, why would we need a writing system? Our community could thrive and be taught and transmit our knowledge and our language without writing. And that's a real question. I'm not going to argue with that. But we are just trying to develop alternative communication system for different kind of purpose that could eventually trigger the adaptation of the speakers themselves. Here is clearly aiming at linguists. But as I said, it can be used in lexicography. Slowly, eventually.
I just have a very banal technical remark. When you mentioned the 65,000K limit, 65K limit, I wondered if you considered using TrueType Collection format as a solution, if that would be...
TrueType has...
TrueType Collection.
What is that? Tell me everything. I'm all ears.
It's a way of bundling multiple TrueType fonts within one container that can then be accessed by the system. But I don't know if that would work at all for you. But
1
maybe.
million?
I don't know how many.
2 million?
Well, you would have to look into the specifics.
Super. Excellent news. This is the news of the day. I can throw away a lot of my work now. Yes, 2 versions.
I was wondering whether it was easy to learn to read the system when you had this testing periods with the people who are concerned, whether it's intuitive and or not.
Yeah, and that has been a very strong element of this dispute among the team. For example, a linguist is driven by data and by analysis. He clearly told us this forms, which is a more analogic form, is a caprice. You're capricious. You're designers. I don't care about that. What is meaningful for me is the data. And it was through insisting arguments to defend the perspective of the user of the language himself, which is the speaker. The speaker doesn't understand what lies on the bottom. What he understands is a frame of reference which is intuitive. This frame of reference is his own body. That's why we work so hard to make the gap between the two and have this hand. Honestly, I hope that it is mostly successful, but only trial and error will tell. Whether for the hand, whether for the upper limb. We are just putting the frame of a conceptual frame to trigger possibilities of perception at a typographic level. Again, it's at a typographic level. Again, it is black and white. There is no dégradé, there is no cast shadow, and there is no 3D goggles. It has to work on a paper A4 printed out.
And how would you combine your tests of representing the third dimension with the finger shapes and?
Yes. Yeah, those elements are upcoming. We'll still be questioning how the graphic space. We know it's a line. We write in a line, but what about the line of the sign language? Is it a line? Is it multiple lines? Does it go left to right, right to left? We have examples from sign writing, which is more top to bottom. Those are questions being asked.
Any more questions? Yes.
Sorry, over here. I was wondering if there's also any potential, or if you have envisioned the potential to add additional levels of expression. The same, I mean, you're talking about typography, right? And typography has other ways of expressing itself, right? So right now, let's say you're doing something that's on its most basic kind of potential expression, but there can be ways in which you can emphasize things. Obviously, I don't know how sign language works, but I might imagine like there might be accents within sign language the same way there are accents in spoken language. There might be different ways of expressing things.
Those accents, I hear exactly what you're talking about. There is a 2-dimension. There's a subjective dimension, the element of culture, the element of speed and time, the element of tempo. All those elements are dimensions of expression that are very, very important in sign language. And is one parameter called movement, which is a very, very complex and very important and interact with all the other parameters. Hand movement, upper limb movement, face movement. But I think what you are referring to is the style of the glyphs themselves.
I think it's like I guess two things. One thing could be the style of the, but also from another side is like, I mean, you can do a movement in like slowly, or you can do it very quickly.
So
and
we're talking about the same thing then. There's indeed two dimensions, the linguistic dimension of expression, and then there is the typographic dimension of expression. And the typographic dimension expression is not yet of our subject. We are just working on the linguistic dimension of representation.
Right.
Thank you very much. That was very fast. The project is very fascinating. I have a question. It's my understanding that sign language is different from language to language, right? Someone in Germany will not use the same gestures as someone in France, for example. So my question is, how adaptable is this across different languages and cultures?
Of sign language.
Of sign language.
Well, because it is attacking the question of at the phonological level, which is at the morphological component of language, it is everybody has the same fingers and arms. So in a way, the system is universal.
Excellent.
Although, because it is highly flexible in how it generates different components, it tends to not restrict, but welcome all the different variation of handshape and combination, contrary to existing systems which are locked. They are a defined set of handshape. And if you're out of it, you're out of it. Right. You just describe it with the alphabet. And that is one of the limitations we try to tackle. Tackling it at a very low level and at its complexity level is the element for us of unbiased, creating in an unbiased way a tool for all researchers of sign language, not just the ones which are dominant.
Thank you.